I love reading about women over 30, especially when they're queer and especially when they're weird as hell. It is wild. I'm so happy with how ridiculous this is. I'm so happy that Lucy Dacus recommended this. Like, actually, I can't believe that. Solid recommendation. Thank you, Lucy Dacus. If you clicked on this video, you probably already know who Lucy Dacus is, but let's go over the basics anyway. She's an American, critically acclaimed poetic singer-songwriter, and she's also 1/3 of boygenius, the supergroup that she's in with Julian Baker and Phoebe Bridgers. Her 4th album, Forever Is a Feeling, came out last weekend on March 28th, and most importantly, she recommends great books. Because Lucy Dacus is mostly known for her very poignant lyrics, and she's often referred to by peers and critics alike as a kind of poet or prophet, I thought it would be interesting to read some of her favorite books and tell you how impeccable her taste really is. Spoiler alert. Very. I took most of the recommendations from this video from a TikTok that Lucy posted at the end of last year or the beginning of this year, talking about all of her favorite books from 2024.
Okay, end of the year. These are some books I liked.
We'll be reading Punks by John Keene, which is a collection of poems about the experience of a Black queer man in Boston in the 1990s. I like to try to take my time with poetry, so a big disclaimer up top. I didn't finish this entire thing, but I read a lot of it, and I read poems from every section, so I'm excited to talk about this with you guys. We'll also be talking about the novel All Fours by Miranda July. This is about a semi-famous artist who lives in California, and she decides that she wants to go on a cross-country trip to New York City, do a road trip all by herself, and she doesn't make it half an hour before she kind of takes a hard left turn and embarks on an experience that will change her entire life. This is like a midlife coming of age story, and it's fascinating. A collection of essays by Leslie Jamison called The Empathy Exams. Now, in her TikTok, Lucy says that she recommends Splinters, but she also says,
Leslie Jamison, another favorite. I think I've read everything she has written.
So I didn't want to start with Splinters because it's a nonfiction. I wanted to start from the beginning, so I went back to read The Empathy Exams. And finally, we'll talk about Intermezzo by Sally Rooney. This is a book about two brothers and their experience navigating grief after the death of their father. Lucy has a tattoo on the inside of her middle finger that says "Die Now."
It gives Zane the middle finger also.
Die now.
Oh. Lucy's finger says "Die now."
Die now.
It's from a
Do we think about that?
And it's a reference to a Lee Young Lee poem called The Undressing. I read that too. Okay, now that we've got our reading list, let's get started. I'm Christina Sophia, and welcome to reading Lucy Dacus's favorite books. All Fours. I started this in the waiting room of a doctor's office. I'm literally only, and I'm in the parking lot of that doctor's office. I'm only on page 13, so this is going to be like a really quick update. I am just having a really hard time getting a grasp on the personality of the main character. 'Cause she's like riddled with contradictions. Like, she says she's really concerned about human beings and why they do what they do, but she also says that it's difficult for her to strike up a meaningful conversation with a stranger. She feels easily embarrassed by certain social conventions, like when other people are expressing sincerity or earnestness, she feels like embarrassed for them. And I mean, the very beginning of this book, literally the first couple lines, she is told from her neighbor, who happens to be an FBI agent, that there was somebody with the telephoto lens photographing her house the other day. And she is a person with like low-level notoriety. It's not specified exactly what she does, but I'm assuming it involves something in the arts where she makes things. She talks about like being in her garage waiting for inspiration to happen, and then getting like in a flow state when it does. So she has a low level of notoriety, and she doesn't actually text back the neighbor right away, because she is excited by the prospect of somebody taking a picture of her. Like, she's excited about the prospect of this like illicit act, and it's not exclusive to this particular experience. She also talks about like kind of living vicariously through, or like being a vulture of her friends and family's drama. Like, she loves being told it, and everybody knows that, so they tell her all of the scandalous things that are happening in their lives. So I don't know, I'm finding her really interesting. She's turning 45. She's going to New York for the weekend. That's kind of all we know right now. even talking about her out loud is kind of like making me understand her a little bit more. But like I said, I'm on page 13. So yeah, I'm interested in her marriage. It seems like she thinks her husband is cooler than her. And it seems like she thinks that everybody thinks her husband is cooler than her. Actually, the last thing I want to mention is this dichotomy that's introduced right towards the beginning of the novel. And it's her husband at a party, and he's talking about the fact that he believes that there are only two kinds of people in this world: parkers and drivers. He says drivers are able to maintain awareness and engagement even when life is boring. And he goes on to say they don't need applause for every little thing. They can find joy and contentment in small moments, like petting a dog or something. And then he says parkers, on the other hand, he looks at me being his wife, need a discrete task that seems impossible, something that takes every bit of focus and for which they might receive applause. He says that when they're not engaging in those tasks, they have like a level of boredom in the rest of their life or disappointment. And we get our main character's internal monologue, and she's like, okay, or depression, like I am depressed. He says that drivers are entertained more easily, but parkers are better in a crisis because parkers like to save the day. And obviously this is incredibly pointed at his wife. So I'm interested to see how this dichotomy manifests itself in the rest of the novel, because it does feel like one of those things that you bring up in the beginning of the book, and then the rest of the book is kind of like we're kind of moving through this dichotomy with her. You keep shaking. Oh no. So those are all my thoughts so far. It's like not a lot, but again, I barely read it. So I'm gonna go to the library, reading my library card, and see if I can get Punks. I'll update you later. Guys, I'm on page 92 of this book. I was not gonna do this until tomorrow morning, but this book is fucking wild. I love it. I get it now. I get it now. This is so funny to me. Okay, that's all. Okay, guys, I'm at work. I have a couple minutes between lessons. I teach kids music, and so do other people here. So I know you can probably hear people warming up, and that's just what this is gonna have to be. I finished the first part of this last night. And oh my god, I didn't know anything about this book before I read it. I think I'm probably going to mention that in the intro. So I really didn't know what was going to happen, but this character is someone who I am fascinated with. I think I said in my first update I was having trouble getting a handle on her personality, but the author is doing an incredible job of establishing how this person has always wanted to live, and how she is in denial of her actual desire and the life she actually lives, and the mutual agreement she feels like she has with her husband to kind of put up this facade or play this game of the kind of couple that they are. And every once in a while she'll talk about snapshots of when they actually did feel very close, and they actually did have intimacy. She had a really kind of traumatic birthing experience, and during that time it felt like she felt really committed and intimate with her husband, and then that kind of went away, and she doesn't feel like she's known. So she tries to go on this road trip. It doesn't happen. She kind of reroutes the trip. I won't give you any more details than that because I don't think you should know anything. But in this kind of detour, she's making choices that feel really visceral to her and really alive, and she is projecting that onto the experience that she thinks she's going to have with her husband when she gets back with him. And I don't know that that's really what's going to happen, but you can see that this person has been like yearning for something, but it's been pushing it down for years and years and years, and it's kind of at the point where it like has to be external. And I think part 2 we're gonna see how it affects her actual real life. I'm like so into this. It's really funny, so funny. I like how it doesn't shy away from female desire and sexuality after 30. It's really cool. Can't wait to keep reading it. I'm absolutely so into this. They like just started, as soon as I press play, they just started playing. Okay, I'm at work again. I have all 4s with me. It is wild. I'm so happy with how ridiculous this is. I was reading it at my job the other day and was kind of like, I feel like I shouldn't be reading this at work. What I'm getting from the book, the patterns that I'm noticing, is that it's all about cycles. I mean, people who menstruate know this very well. Like, your menstruation is on a cycle. Your life is on a cycle. Trauma can be on a cycle. It can be generational. There are evolutions that you have in your life. And it's kind of about how fast the circle is turning from what I'm perceiving, as in, we live, we menstruate, we reach a point in our life where we don't anymore. That starts kind of like a new life. Or we have traumas or things in our bodies that we hold, and then we pass on to our kids, and then our kids are maybe the people that break the cycle. So there's a lot of cyclical patterns in this book. I like it because it is able to apply to different aspects of this person's life. Like, she's entering a new phase of her life. It's definitely a coming of age story. I understand why people are saying that now. And so she's starting a new cycle, but she's also kind of honoring these feelings that she's been repressing for so long, and that's starting a cycle of evolution and learning about herself. I'm trying to be careful talking about it because I don't want to reveal too much, but I'm really enjoying it. It's absolutely ridiculous, and I'm almost done. I have like less than 100 pages left, so I'm going to try to knock it out, and then I'll talk to you after. But I do appreciate how unapologetically queer it is. The boys are laughing, the guitar guys are laughing. I do appreciate how unapologetically queer it is. I like the fluidity of language, and it makes a lot of sense for a book and a character like this who's trying to explore that fluidity. It's also explicit as hell, and in like a fun, like a way that I feel is unexplored terrain. All of this book to me feels like unexplored terrain. The character feels like she is kind of embarking on a journey of like unmarked land, which makes sense. That's what we do as we get older. We've never been older than the age we are now, but it's fun to read about somebody who isn't like completely messing up and not getting it all of the time and not understanding how she's feeling, but who's taking all of that in stride. Even when she may feel disappointed or ashamed or angry, she's also finding moments of like joy and liberation and curiosity and courageousness. So yeah, or courage. There's a word for that. It's called courage. So it's like so exciting to read because she's not perfect and she keeps like making mistakes, but really, are they mistakes if you're just kind of figuring it out? And you can figure it out at 46. God, I love this. I love reading about older women. It's making me so happy. Okay, I'll update you when I'm done. All right, y'all, I finished all fours. I'm holding it like this because there's an insane glare, but this is one of my favorite books now. I absolutely adored this. I know I talked a lot about how irreverent it was. I've never read Miranda July before, and I really like the tone of this novel. It's so ridiculous, unapologetically sexual and queer, and just is kind of like breaking open the way that we think about certain things, which I always really appreciate in literature. I also really like how this book was noticing how women make themselves smaller, but instead of just saying it, she notices how it comes out in small ways in others and how she's crafted her life to be like that herself. I'm talking about the main character. There's this particular quote I like. "I often chastise myself saying, look who's getting too big for their britches, but no matter how small I made myself, I was always too big for them. They must have been very small britches to begin with." I think that's a part of the coming of age story as well. Noticing how small you've made yourself and then trying to become an embodied person who lives a little bit bigger. There's a lot of classifications of certain kinds of people. Like in the beginning, I mentioned that there were parkers and there were drivers, but she also kind of draws this line between people who are in their minds and people who are in their bodies. And she's always considered herself a person that has been in her mind, but I think this book is also her realizing that to be embodied is a choice that you can make and work toward. You can allow yourself to have it. You don't have to be stuck one way for your whole life. There are certain things that make you you, but there are other things that you can explore. Also, the conversations about perimenopause in this were so awesome. How it's not really brought up to women until they're experiencing it, how the symptoms are like pretty severe and nobody really lets us know that. There is an episode of What Now with Trevor Noah, which is one of my favorite podcasts, where he brings on Halle Berry of all people, and she discusses perimenopause and the stigma around it. I've been on a really awesome kick lately of reading things that challenge social conventions. A lot of the times when you're really concerned with living, it can't be confined into language that we already know and understand. Sometimes it's just about what you feel and what you know and what you're learning and how it connects to your community. And that community can include lovers and friends and family and people who don't necessarily fit into those boxes because they don't actually have to. Another unspecified group that exists in an unspecified place that's just yours and theirs. And that's okay. I absolutely adore reading books that completely break open all of the things that we tell ourselves and all of the things that others are telling us. This was that. And the last thing I have in my notes in all capital letters is, I love reading about women over 30, especially when they're queer and especially when they're weird as hell. So, all fours. Solid recommendation. Thank you, Lucy Dacus. just got home from work. I was gonna go to the beach. I might still do that, but I instead just flopped on my bed and immediately picked this up because, guys, it is so I am obsessed with this. I'm in love with this poetry collection, and honestly, like, new favorite poet alert, maybe? Like, I really like it that much. I'm so happy that Lucy Dacus recommended this. Like, actually, I can't believe that we get to have poetry like this. I think the reason why this is hitting so hard for me is because if you're familiar at all with the AIDS crisis in the 80s and the epidemic that it was, then you'll understand the amount of artists that we've lost. The dedication in this book says, "For Curtis, and in tribute to all of the writers who never lived to see their words and lives remembered and celebrated." And that's exactly what this book is doing. It's remembering and it's celebrating. It's remembering the way that it was. A lot of it takes place in Boston. So we are getting snapshots of the experience of a gay Black man in Boston, and I think some of it's in New York. And we're seeing the world through his eyes. It feels very smoky. It feels very atmospheric. A lot of it is seeped in discretion because obviously not a lot of spaces were safe for the queer community. And it's about finding those places that are and seeing what those places are like and learning about the characters who often frequent them and what they're talking about. They're reminiscing about older days. They're talking about other people in the community and who's with who and who used to be with that person. There are plenty of poems about desire and lust, and it's so interesting how John Keene is able to imbue it with so much subtext about self-worth, because a lot of these are like secret trysts with people that you're not going to ever see again, and that's what you get. Like, that is what's available to you, or at least that's what it feels like is available to you. And reading them, you're like, the first pass, you're completely in it, like you're completely enamored by a specific experience, and then when you read it again, you think, oh my god, but this small space is all that they had to exist in. However, these people are so big and there's so much inside of them. It's so great. It's so great. My favorite so far is one called The Napoleon Club. I think it does a lot of this, but ultimately it feels like a celebration of the community and like the life in the community. What John Keene has that I adore is this like pop and groove to the way that he writes. The cadence and the rhythm of it is beautiful. It's so fun. It really feels like you're moving with it, and it feels Black as fuck. It's so awesome. Guys, please read this. I'm so excited to keep reading this. I'm probably going to go to the beach and just keep reading this. I didn't think I was going to get through the whole thing, but I'm like devouring this. Usually I take poetry really slow, and I am trying to read all of them at least twice, but I keep wanting to like just keep going and going and going. Oh God, I love this. I wasn't planning on updating again until later, but I just read this poem called Suits about grief, and the next one is called On Receiving a Letter Back Stamped Deceased. Like, guys, this is beautiful. Suit for Phil Horowitz. If sorrow is its suit, its weight is incalculable. Grief sent like the first breath in a foreign country, and you fear your entry, but you're already in. Guys, I was gonna wait to update you guys about this later. It's so beautiful. There's this great poem phone book that I think does a lot of what I was alluding to before in a very specific way. He goes through every letter of the alphabet and starts naming people that he knows or used to know, or people that used to know the people that he used to know, and where they are now and what they were doing when he first knew them. And it's so much about community and also like almost like diaspora, like the forgotten, but it's not always like forlorn. It's simply the fact of what it is. God, I don't know. It's just so masterfully done. It's so difficult to talk about because it's so good. Does anybody else experience that? Like when you're reading something like this and it just moves you so deeply that it's difficult to actually articulate why it's moving you because it's just so emotional? or it's such a or it's such a significant experience. I don't know, man. I'm officially on section 2. It's called The Lost World, and the quote to start it is, "I remember, ergo I live," by Jamie Manrique. Excited for this. The first poem is called Try to Remember That South African Man, and it's about his experience with a South African man who was a tourist, was a bit older, and they're talking about racism in America and apartheid in South Africa and blackness and the way that they are connected. It's interesting. So like I said earlier in the video, I didn't complete this entire thing as I suspected I wouldn't, but oh my god, I love it so much. I borrowed this from the library and I'm going to buy my own copy because I simply need it in my life. This is like a new all-time fave. Thank you, Lucy Dacus. What's to say that hasn't been said? There are poems in here that meditate on the grief and sadness of losing members of the queer community to the AIDS crisis. If you're not familiar, there was an AIDS epidemic in the United States and it was completely mishandled by the government, and it became a disease that had a lot of stigma attached to it that obviously targeted gay men in particular. And it's a really significant part of American history that I feel is completely undertaught in this public school system, because it was so devastating, the amount of people that we lost. And if I stop and think about it too hard, it like actually sends me to the dark place. Like, I can't even begin to imagine how much joy and culture and art that we lost in that period of time because of the neglect of the American government. And this does an incredible job of bringing it down to a specific individual level. I can't remember who said it. I saw a quote recently that was talking about writing about devastation, or writing about war, or writing about traumatic historical events. And it essentially was saying, don't write about the big things. Like, if it's war, don't write about the bombs. Write about the children's shoes that you see in the street and the understanding that that child is probably no longer with us. Write about the little things. And that is what's going to get people, because that's the real experience, and that's something that you can connect to. And I think that this book does a great job, or these poems do a great job of that, the ones that are about the AIDS crisis. One thing I really liked about this is that different sections have different kinds of poems in them. For example, some sections have poems mostly written in free verse, and others have lines that are very carefully like crafted and charted. It's just like a deeply important first-hand account of what it's like to be a Black queer American man in Boston at this point in American history. I think it is poignant, and it's funny, and it's beautiful, and it's yearning, and it's groovy, and it has like a pop and a rhythm to it, and it's Black as fuck, and it's so good. And it should be like, the poems in this should be like required reading. It's really great. So please, please, please read this. Please pick this up. Thank you so much, Lucy Dacus. Like, seriously, I almost don't want to I feel like I'm setting your expectations way too high, and you're going to project something onto it and it won't be able to live up to your projection. So still go into it open and neutral with an open mind. But yeah, I just think it's so great. Like I said before, Intermezzo by Sally Rooney is about two brothers' experience with grief. Now, I just did a video breaking down every one of Sally Rooney's novels, and I really get into Intermezzo over there, so I'm not going to talk too much about it now. If you want to know a little bit more about the book, I suggest you watch that video. But just for the purposes of today, we are talking about Peter and Ivan. Ivan is a chess prodigy, or I guess former chess prodigy, in his early 20s, who becomes romantically involved with Margaret, who is the program director for an art center, and she's in her mid-30s. Peter is in his mid-30s. He's Ivan's older brother, and he is involved with Naomi, who's in her early 20s going to university, and she is an ex-sex worker. And he's also kind of involved with Sylvie, who is his college sweetheart turned ex-girlfriend after she suffered a major accident and they decided to end their relationship. But they still have this inexplicable bond with one another. Sally Rooney, when talking about this book, in an incredible article that I'll link below, that you should really read that interview. It's such a great interview, and it gives a lot of insight into this particular novel. She discusses how, unlike chess, which is a game that you're really focused on playing or not at all, grief is not that simple. It's not that cut and dry. It can show up in your life in mysterious or subtle or subconscious ways, and that's kind of what is happening with Ivan and Peter. They're trying to identify where grief is in their life and how it is affecting the people around them. And they're also navigating the tumultuous relationship that they have with one another. They're explosively angry to one another, but they also are like really desiring of the other person's connection. Like basically all of Sally Rooney's books, it discusses Marxism often. And if you want to learn more about that, again, you should watch that other video because it's too much to put in this one video. It also just kind of discusses the deeply intimate relationships that we have that we might want to keep intimate and reconciling that with also wanting to live in community with other people. It's really poignant. I love it. It really picks up speed as you're reading it. It might take a second to get into, but once you're in, you're so in. I don't often get emotional reading books, but I was very emotional at the end of this one. I think it's kind of a modern classic. Sally Rooney has done it again. She's not for everybody, but if she's for you in a big way. So I honestly highly recommend this book. Surprise, surprise. I'm at work again. I just started The Undressing by Lee Young Lee, and it's dense. And I'm loving it. I'm like writing a bunch of notes on it. Like I'm still doing my English degree. I'm having a lot of, well, I was gonna say I'm having a lot of fun with it. I don't know if fun's the right word. I'm really sinking into it. I feel like it's just about existential struggle, just like that's nothing. More when I'm finished. I finished The Undressing by Lee Young Lee. So I talked at the beginning about the reason why I was reading this. It's because Lucy has a Die Now tattoo on the inside of her middle finger. This poem is really dense and existential. Here's Lucy talking a little bit about it in an interview with Zane Lowe that boygenius did with Apple Music.
It's the end of a poem called The Undressing by Lee Young Lee. And it's actually quite a horny poem.
It's so horny.
But
It's very horny.
I got it the day of our Forest Hill show in New York. We all got stick and pokes. And
That's the worst.
I was like, I'll read the poem out loud while I get this. And then I was like regretting it.
That's the worst. You know
Like everyone around was like,
It is quite a horny poem. I so deeply enjoyed the process of like going through this and like making a bunch of notes on it and sitting with it and thinking about it. And I so deeply crave to be in a college English classroom again so I can talk about it with other people. Like my thoughts about it are not fully developed or fully formed, and this definitely feels like a piece of poetry that I'm going to come back to in a couple years, and a couple years after that, and a couple years after that. Two things are happening at the same time in this poem. There's a woman who has this almost divine knowledge. It feels like ancient wisdom about life and human behavior, and she's trying to impart her knowledge on our narrator, but he is kissing her and touching her and essentially trying to initiate sex with her. Of course, this is a metaphor, but for what? I don't necessarily want to say. One, because I don't know fully myself. I have no concrete answers. It's poetry. It's okay that I don't have any concrete answers. And two, because I don't want to tell you my ideas, and then if you read this poem, you are thinking about it with my ideas in your head. You should have your own ideas, and that's part of what makes this exciting. Here's what I will say. The woman in this poem is kind of challenging the narrator to listen to what she's saying because it's important. They're important facts about life. She's almost warning him against frivolity or wasting the life that he has. It's deeply existentially aware. The feeling of the menace of the abyss, as our narrator characterizes it, is in the entire poem. It's also kind of about human tendency to fight this awareness or distract ourselves from it, as the narrator is doing by not quite listening to what the woman is saying. There's an interesting motif of duality about the internal life that somebody has, the things that they say to themselves, how they feel in their quiet moments alone, and then how we act when we are with other people. There's also a motif of burning and fire and this ember that is at the center, and that is God, but not God in the traditional Christian sense. I think it's just God as a representation of the divine or spiritual or like the universe or whatever word you prefer. One line that I thought was interesting was God is accomplished in the realm of change and desire. So I don't know if that means introspection, evolution, consideration. I mean, you decide. She makes a point at the end of this poem to say that it's kind of too late to put all of our faith in man-made totems or systems that we created to have a sense of security or comfort and allegiance, ultimately those things are fruitless, and actually the pursuit of love is the thing that is the most significant and important, and love is that burning. Love is the divine. There are lines about human connection and interpersonal behavior that are discussed in such beautiful verse. Some stanzas are just two simple lines to serve as a kind of punctuation to the previous idea that are so poignant. You just kind of have to like sit and stare into the middle distance for a second with it, or at least I did. One of the things that the woman says in this poem that I think is beautiful and also kind of indicative of the knowledge that she has, the kind of tone that this poem in general is trying to create. We beings of non-being, each so recent a creature, and only lately spirits learning how to love. I don't know, it's kind of saying like life is ancient and cyclical and exacting, and when it finally gets to die now, it could be die now to yourself in order to achieve this like existential, intellectual, or spiritual transcendence, to participate in that divine love and burning. I don't know, you like, again, you decide. I think it's really worth listening to the rest of that interview that they do with Zane Lowe. They keep talking about poetry and how like Lucy has a hot take about poetry that you shouldn't read it out loud.
Hot take. I don't think poetry should be heard. I think it should be read.
I agree. I don't think that's not hot.
No, I think it's really hot. Because like poetry is supposed to be read. Like,
Yes.
I
but
agree.
I think that the way that it is on a page,
Yes.
like the line breaks, and like I just think I like to read it more than hear it.
If it's read or performed, doesn't it become something else anyway in a strange way?
Yeah, I think
It's
so.
me. I have a take on this, and that it is music. The poetry read aloud
Yes, that's what I was-
is
it's-
in the realm of music.
It's music. That's exactly what I was going to say. I feel like that's when it becomes something that is
think-
performative in its very nature, and that's a beautiful thing too.
If you're interested in that and learning a little bit more about that, or just hearing like really cool, interesting musicians talk about literature and conversation with like history and the music that they're making now, you should watch that. Guys, I'm using natural light, and if the lighting is all over the place, I'm like really sorry. Okay. Hello. Oh geez, I look insane. I have been listening to the empathy exams. Jameson opens by telling us about an experience that she had when she really needed money. So she would pretend to be a patient for the benefit of like med students' education. So she would go in, they would give her like a 12-page script and list of symptoms, and then she would have to pretend to be somebody who needed treatment, and these med students would come in and help her. And she talks about one of the criteria that she had to judge them on after they were done being verbal expression of empathy. It's not that they seem concerned or they had a considerate tone. They had to like verbally express their empathy for your situation. And then she begins to discuss what that really means and the value of actual empathy over saying something simply to get points for it. And she has this great quote. I wish I had it in front of me. But she begins talking about how asking those questions should be to understand that person's pain, and not simply to get a score. And actually, real empathy over performative empathy is coaxing information out of somebody because you're making them feel comfortable enough to share things with you, and you are now walking together through their experience. So I think we're talking about like what empathy actually is, like performative empathy versus actual empathy. I remember being in school and learning about the word empathy and getting this like very watered down technical explanation of like, it means when you care about people's feelings. Sure, like yeah, but also it's more than that. What does that actually look like practically in our lives? Yeah, I mean, it's really early doors. I think I'm in like chapter 1 or 2 or something, like whatever, but I'll update you later. Hi, I'm back in the car. And there are 2 cars on either side of me. I'm in the parking lot, so this could get awkward really fast. I'm at the library because I just got Punks by John Keane. I'm very excited to start reading this. I also just filmed my Beginner's Guide to Sally Rooney video, which is why I'm wearing the same clothes. But I'm not here to talk about any of those things. I'm here to talk about the empathy exams. So I kept reading it. I can't remember what I said in the beginning, but I'm realizing that each chapter is a new essay. So that's kind of why the first chapter was so long. So I'm interested in that. But empathy is the overarching theme of all of the essays. So in the first chapter, the first essay that we got, I should look at you, not me. In the first chapter, in the first essay that we got, we are listening to the narrator talk about 3 things. One is, like I said before, how she had the job of pretending to be a patient for med students. 2, how she has a serious heart condition that she had to get multiple surgeries for. And 3, how she had an abortion. She's talking about empathy in those 3 spheres. We're learning about something with the med students. She's setting up a concept, and then we're into her life with one of those other 2 things happening that begin to join together, and we're hearing about the practical implications of all of the things that she's saying to the med students, or how I suppose actually rather they live in her life. She's making really interesting points about empathy, and she's trying to identify what empathy actually is. She was saying that during one of her hospital stays for her heart condition, her partner went to the chapel in the hospital and prayed for her. And when she was thinking about him being sad and praying for her, she wondered if that was actually empathy, because it didn't seem like he was trying to internalize her pain or feel her pain as her own. It felt more like he was trying to wish the pain away, and those aren't necessarily the same thing. She was also talking about an experience she had with her brother where he was going through something, and she kind of internalized his experience but as her own experience. Christina, isn't that just empathy? No, I mean he experienced a medical emergency, and then she thought, what if I experienced that emergency? And she started thinking about it in terms of her own life. What would I do? What would I need? Looking in the mirror, being like, what if that were me? Not in a way that was trying to consider the experience of her brother, in a way that was trying to consider her own experience had she had those circumstances. There is a difference. And see, the best thing about this book is because of the fact that the 2 things that I just said, you could mistake for the same thing, but they're not. There's subtle nuances in between them, and that's what she's exploring. And she's doing it with such deftness and control of language. She has such a handle of syntax, and it really helps you kind of ponder these bigger questions, because then you start thinking, okay, am I actually an empathetic person, or am I just wishing that they weren't going through what they were going through, which is not the same thing? Or am I actually an empathetic person, or is it selfish because I am thinking about what it would mean for me? She also raises the question, are you practicing empathy because you want other people to like you? Is it that you are caring for other people because you want those other people to care for you? So we're asking a lot of questions. We're not necessarily coming up on anything concrete just yet, but I'm interested to see as these essays go along where we go. I'm really into this, and I'm glad that I started with this and I didn't start with Splinters. Okay, I finished the empathy exams. I didn't update you again because I really wanted to see where it went, where this collection of essays was going to go, and it felt like it was best considered in its whole, to me at least. So the context of the entire thing would help me understand a little bit more about it. And ultimately, I think it is just one big thought experiment about empathy and all of the questions that I brought up before. What is it? How does it actually work in our lives? And she explores it through very different topics. It was the job with the med students that I talked about. It was her abortion. She gets into incarceration. She talks about prisoners and 2 prisoners. She talks about, there's one essay at the end of this collection that I actually read before. It's called The Grand Unified Theory of Female Pain, and I am obsessed with it. I remember reading it for class, and I printed it out, and I was making notes all over it and highlighting a bunch of different parts. One of my friends who I thought would like it because she's very into gender and women's studies, I gave it to her and lent it to her over break, and she gave it back to me, and she was like, oh my god, it was great. So it's truly a wonderful essay, and it's my favorite in the whole book. I didn't know that it was a part of this collection of essays, but as soon as I realized it, I was so excited. And when I read it or listened to it again, it totally held up, and I liked it even better than the first time. That particular essay is about how female pain is often glorified, and then it's glorified to the point of frustration or irritation toward other people. So then people feel like they need to be cynical or sarcastic and say, I'm not like those people, and I'm not trying to exploit my pain. However, that pain is real. It's just in conversation with female pain, the way that people write about female pain, the way that women talk about their pain, how that pain is received by other people. then the defense mechanisms that we use for it. It's, oh God, I think it's really wonderful. I'm glad I read this. I'm interested to keep reading Leslie Jamison's work. I liked this a lot, but I do think that there are probably ones that I'll like a little bit better. I'm interested to read like a memoir that is one continuous story and not necessarily a collection of essays. I think perhaps I would have enjoyed this a little bit more if I had more time to read them separately, even though I do think that as a whole, they are all in conversation with each other. It would have been nice to be able to like read an essay, give myself like a couple days, and then read another one or another two. But obviously I was doing it for a video, so I read it a little bit quicker than I would normally read something like this. Lucy Dacus has impeccable taste, obviously. It makes a lot of sense to me why she likes these books. I don't know Lucy. I think it's really dangerous to think that you know your favorite artist personally. I'm not making that judgment because I think that. I'm making that judgment because when I think about her work and the way that she discusses it and the way that she discusses literature, these being in conversation with that make a lot of sense to me. It feels like they fit. I hope you pick up literally any one of these books. Please consider subscribing. I'm a new booktuber. It helps a lot. And please follow me on Instagram and TikTok at ChrisSophia13. Let me know what other celebrity I should be paying attention to in terms of like books and media recommendations. I would love to do that. Not even just books, movies, music. I kind of want to watch some actors' favorite movies and talk to you about them. We'll see. I'm cooking. Don't worry. I've been cooking. But if you guys want to throw some ingredients in there too, I'd be more than happy to consider them. As always, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Have a great day and read a book.